it's not just about the terms that ends fighting. It's about also the terms that set up Ukraine for long-term prosperity. I thought we started laying the groundwork for that, most certainly in Geneva. I think we continued that work in our communications throughout the week. I think we built on that again today, but there's more work to be done. This is delicate, it's complicated, there are a lot of moving parts, and obviously there's another party involved here that'll have to be a part of the equation, and that'll continue later this week when Mr. Witkoff travels to Moscow.
For more on this, let's bring in Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent, Oliver Crook, from Brussels. So, Ollie, what is the latest in terms of the US-Ukraine talks? What came out of these meetings?
So as you heard from Marco Rubio, the progress had been made, but again, as we say, there's still a lot of work to be done. So that Thanksgiving deadline that we had originally set for last week, we've obviously blown past that, and so we're going to focus our attention on a few of the diplomatic events that will be happening this week. Today, we expect Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, to be in Paris to meet with Emmanuel Macron. Here in Brussels, the European defense ministers will meet on Wednesday. We expect Marco Rubio to actually make a trip over here to Brussels to meet with NATO foreign ministers to have discussions here in the sort of NATO meeting. But of course, many of these sort of proposals that were laid out in that original plan, that 28-point plan, include both the Europeans and NATO without really their input into that discussion. So it'll be a key moment here for the Europeans to talk to the U.S. Secretary of State and try to get their sort of their desires and their ambitions and what they'd like to see in this deal before the United States. We should say that all of this will be sort of preceding potentially that visit from Steve Witkoff. We don't know yet exactly when he'll be arriving in Moscow. There were some reports that he may leave as early as today, but I'm sure that is still a work in progress. We should say overall, Tom, since we got that 28-point plan and then that was reduced to what we understand a 19-point plan, we have not seen that living document. So we do not know yet, because this is now being done very much behind closed doors, how far apart the sides are on these issues of territory, on these issues of security guarantees. And that is obviously the absolute key, Tom, in trying to appraise how much progress is being made here. We hear that there is progress being made, but at this stage, we don't really know what this plan looks like. Of course, the key concerns for the Ukrainians, the thing that they will be sort of encouraged by, is that it's actually Marco Rubio that's sitting at the other side of the table, who has a much more traditionalist view of geopolitics, much more ideological, much more principled, particularly when it comes to the Russian threat. The bad news for the Ukrainians is, of course, their delegation head on Friday resigned, Andrei Yermak, the #2 in Ukraine, after he was sort of ensnared in these investigations into corruption. And we should say that nothing has been leveled against him yet, but his office and his home were both searched, so he resigned on Friday to Zelensky.
Yes, it's significant, of course, domestic story for Ukraine, but percolating out to these negotiations with that impact, of course, in terms of the focus on the corruption scandal in Ukraine. EU defence ministers then meeting in Brussels today, Ollie. Presumably, these peace discussions are going to be a central part of that conversation. What are you expecting to hear from that meeting?
Certainly. In attendance will also be the Ukrainian Defense Minister, Denis Shmyhal, who will be discussing with the European defense ministers a little bit further today. We expect them to bring up, obviously, Ukraine, their own sort of defense within the European continent, the hybrid threats that the Russians have been posing. Remember, there was an explosion that the Polish Prime Minister designated as sabotage just 2 weeks ago on domestic Polish soil. So that is going to be part of the conversation. But I think, Tom, the concern for the Europeans from the very beginning and sort of their influence over this is that it is very, very limited. And for the Ukrainian defense minister, who will be here, he may not get much more than just sort of positive reassurance and positive rhetoric from the Europeans. When you look at the actual diplomatic side of things, what happened over the weekend? We had Viktor Orban in Moscow talking with Vladimir Putin, and we've also had the Belgians over the last few days really digging in on this idea that they were not really open to figuring out what to do with these Russian assets, saying that maybe, we should actually wait and see, and that actually now that there are these peace negotiations, it's actually a very delicate time, and maybe we shouldn't be touching these Russian assets. So as far as actual support that would help buttress the Ukrainian position, I wouldn't be too optimistic from the meetings today, other than potentially the rhetoric. I doubt this is going to be a major breakthrough meeting for the Ukrainians in their negotiations and what the European influence could actually be in these talks.